Hey everyone, this is Sony Artisan and Singh-Ray Ambassador Don Smith, and I'd like to welcome you today to a video where I plan to show you how I have my new Sony Alpha 1 configured for both landscape photography and for wildlife/action photography. And set up pretty simply. I want to preface this with the fact that I'm pretty minimalist in how I set my cameras up. If you're looking for something super in-depth, go to YouTube. There's a lot of really long tutorials on this camera that will be answering all the questions you would need to know. I don't go that much in depth, but I'm going to show you, just like I said, how I set mine up and how it works for me. And the reason I don't like getting too involved with all of these cameras with every setting in there, for example, if you look up in the top right, we're on page 1 of 52 menus. And then you can see that we could have multitudes of sub-menus. So there could be 600 things to learn about this camera. Far too much for the scope of this video. I also want to preference that this is for still photography, not for movies. I don't fancy myself an expert in videography. There are other people far more talented than I am in that realm that you would seek advice from, but we're going to stick strictly to setting you up for still photography. So if you have your camera in front of you, you can see I'm starting on page 1 of 52, but I'm not actually going to go there because none of this would make sense to you if you don't have the camera ready to go. So, excuse me, if you don't know the menus. I got a little distracted there. I apologize. So I'm actually going to switch over here to my first camera icon. And I think I want to first say that Sony's done a terrific job on organizing their menus and making them far more logical and understandable and easy to go in and find things. This was always the knock on the older Sony cameras. And I will say, as a Sony Artisan, we get together periodically with our engineering group, and we actually get to have one-on-one sit-downs, and I take these comments and concerns that I hear from my workshop participants about the Sony, and for those of you that write me on social media for that matter, or send me an email, it doesn't fall on deaf ears. I take it to the engineers, they can present it to their bosses, and it eventually works its way up and into these cameras. They're very much open to listening to us. So enough of me rambling. Let's start out and start going through these. If you have your camera, just follow along. I'm going to come up first to image quality, and I want to talk about this first one over here, JPEG and HEIF. Excuse me, let me get back to this. This may be just a more efficient JPEG. I'd have to do more research on it. You guys may know better than I do. But for right now, the bottom line is I just leave mine on JPEG, and I rarely shoot JPEG in the world of landscapes. In fact, I don't do it at all. Everything I shoot is in RAW mode. Speaking of, I set up that I like both my RAW files written to both slot 1 and slot 2. And I believe if we come over to record media settings, this is where we go into record media. I've set mine up to simultaneous recording. If you want to write JPEGs to one and RAWs to another, feel free. I'm always, over the course of my career, which has been quite long, and I've been in digital since the get-go in 2002, all in, I've had cards go bad on me, and I don't want to risk a shoot to just one card. So everything writes off simultaneous, and that's where I set it up. Let's see here, the files. I don't do anything with copyright or IPTC inside the camera. I know a lot of photographers do. They set up a copyright, they write their serial number. I probably should be doing that. That's just not my workflow. My workflow always starts out with a program called Photo Mechanic, and in there I set up all my copyright info and my ITPC templates. But if I was working strictly with Lightroom, you could do it there also. It's one of those personal choices. And maybe after this recording, who knows, I go in and I add my copyright and a serial number, and then it's one less step I have to do in post. Shooting mode, I don't touch any of these. I know I've seen multitude of YouTube videos where one will be set up for 8K video, one will be set up for stills, one set up for sports, one set up for landscape, blah, 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 blah. I don't do any of that. Again, I'm a minimalist. Drive mode, there's nothing in here that I play with other than people will ask me, let's go down to bracket settings. And this is if you're going to do, if you're into HDR, which I'm not, but if I'm in a very contrasty scene, I will manually bracket pictures. And I know there's a lot of talk, well, you know, you're going to get a misregistration on the clouds. The time of day I shoot, I'm an edge of the day shooter, so it's really not pertinent to me. If you're somebody that likes shooting in the middle of the day, pay attention to this. Here's your interval if you want to set up an intervalometer. I think this is so cool, and back in the day we used to have to use remotes for this. And here's Sony's pixel shift, which I really don't use, but you know, if you are going to use it, just be sure there is absolutely nothing moving in your frame or you'll miss registration. This is cool, the silent mode shootings for your shutter. I actually was shooting some golf the other day, so I went in and turned it on, but it freaks me out not to hear a fake shutter noise going, even though I'm in an electronic shutter mode. You know, but in certain things I could see, like a wedding, or if you're shooting sports, or you know, I know back in the day I had to shoot funerals, believe it or not, when I worked for newspapers. You just want to be a fly on the wall. There you can go turn off your camera and you could shoot in the middle of a professional golfer's backswing and they would not even know you were there. Shutter type, I leave mine to auto, but you do have your choices of mechanical if you're shooting on strobes, which when I was team photographer of the San Jose Sharks, I could light a full arena with high-powered Speedotron strobes. And now we're getting 1/400th of a second shutter speed for that. But in the world of landscape, I really sold all my lighting gear. Even my on-camera flashes are gone. I just use LED lights, and I very rarely use any artificial lighting anymore. I'm just all ambient lighting. So I just leave it on auto. Release without lens, I disabled. This one definitely, gang, disable. If you had that on, you could go out and do an entire shoot without a card in your camera, and you would think you had been shooting. I've heard the horror stories. Image stabilization, steady shot, I leave it on, but that's because I'm 100% Sony lenses. If you're using third-party lenses, then you may want to turn it off and choose your lens setting, or leave it on and leave your lens stabilizer on or off, excuse me. You would leave it off if you turn the camera on. But with Sony gear, it is the lenses and the cameras talk to each other. So I'm always on my camera and my lenses, and I let the computer pick the best of what it should be. Zoom range, I don't mess with anything there. The only thing in shooting display I mess with is I love rule of thirds. I always have. 40 some years of doing landscape. That's how I learned to compose. That's my friend. That's what I understand. So I just turn it on. Let's come down to number 2, media. Here's where they put the format your card. I actually put that out on my menu. That's one of the settings I put out there. Because I'm always formatting cards. I never format a card until I am back in my office and it's backed up to the cloud and it's backed up to a minimum 2 drives in my office. So I have 3 physical, actually it's 3 drives in my office. I actually have 3 physical drives and a cloud, and then and only then do I feel comfortable with going ahead and formatting the card. I use none of this. We talked about this in file. Let's see, I'm getting to where I'm repeating myself here, aren't I? So I was right, going to the next camera icon. Exposure, I just use the right wheel on the back to get to ISO, but I also set it up in a function menu so I can access it both ways. I'm usually at base ISO on this camera of 100 for landscape, unless I need to bump it to get a little something different in the shutter speed, while not disturbing my depth of field with my aperture, if that makes sense to you. I oftentimes, shooting wildflowers in the wind or over by the coast where there's a lot of wind, I will actually go into auto mode and set a shutter speed fast enough to capture the wildflowers. And while we're on ISO, I've run a lot of tests with this camera. I was up in Yosemite last week shooting from full sunshine to clouds to sunset, and then all the way up till about midnight. And up to 6400, you got a really good usable file. Probably up to 8000 ISO, I would feel comfortable going with it. But once I got up to 12,800, the file seriously fell apart fast. So the break point is somewhere probably around 8000 ISO for my taste. It may be different for yours. Exposure compensation, nothing I really set in there. Metering mode, I'm always in multi-mode. And then you get down to face priority. I leave that on. My spot metering, I just leave the link to center. I think that's on by default. And AEL, I'm going to get into that in a moment because we're going to offset that button to help you out with your back button focusing. Flash, as I said, I no longer use flash, so none of these are relevant to me. White balance, I'm always shooting in raw mode. So unless I'm indoors under a constant setting of light, I'm just in auto white balance. Color tone, D-range optimizer, creative look, and picture profile. Picture profile has to do, well, all of these have to do with movie and stills. Picture profile, you can go in and pick that, but it's only going to work on a JPEG, any of these three, if you're in still, and I'm always shooting in raw mode. Zebra display is your highlight alert. In Sony speak, it's called Zebra. Mine is on. My Zebra level is set to 100. You can see you can go to 100 plus, and you can use your own custom. I know that at 100 on this camera, and I test every camera, I can overexpose by a stop and a third to a stop and 2/3 on my histogram on my camera and recover that in RAW. And you may be asking, well, why is that? Well, because the histogram you're seeing on the back of your camera or through your electronic viewfinder is a processed JPEG. Always remember that. It's not a histogram for a RAW file. It's a histogram for how the camera thought the picture should be processed. Whoops, let me make sure I'm not skipping any of these. No. Okay, so priority set, I put autofocus single, autofocus continuous, and really both of those should be set to release. That will allow you to get the full, I know there was some talk, one of it came up on a huge YouTube influencer where he said that the Sony 30 frames a second were slowing down, and it was because I believe he had his camera set to balanced emphasis. So if you set it to release, you're going to get the full 30 frames a second all the time in autofocus continuous, and that's if it happens to be out of focus, it's out of focus, but it will not slow your motor drive. It won't diminish that for you. AF Illuminator, I hate that thing. I turn it off. That's a light that will emit to give you something to focus on. Autofocus with shutter, really you can, I on this camera turn it off. On some of my other cameras it doesn't matter if I have it on or off. In this camera thus far, how I'm working with it, I turn it off. I don't have a lens on, but pre-autofocus I turn that off also. My focus area, I always use expand flexible or expand spot. I don't have a lens on again to give you the options, but that's where you're going to get, it's like sticky focus. It's just going to lock onto your subject. I was shooting my son and a friend of his golfing the other day. They were in a bunker. I was shooting them tight with a 400 millimeter with that classic splash of sand and the ball coming up. And I know on my previous cameras, as the sand came up, the camera autofocus would get confused and it would go to the sand and off the subject's face. But I just held it on the subject's face and it knew to stay there, and the ball in the sand exploded and never once came off their faces. It was really kind of cool, some of the shots. Let's see, this, I only turned this on, and I should, because, oh, this is autofocus area. No, I don't want to turn that on. Excuse me, I was thinking of something else. Let me go through these. These are all, this one, the circle of focus point, a lot of people don't know what that is. And if you're working near an edge with your autofocus point and you happen to go off the edge, it'll just like circulate around. So let's say it goes off the right side of the edge on your viewfinder, it'll reappear on the left side of your edge. So it's like it makes a full circle. That's what that's all about. Face eye, this is all the cool stuff. Now you have bird eye in here where you can go in, and I always leave it on because in Sony cameras it's really cool, the sequencing. It'll always start with the eye. If it can't find the eye, it'll default to the face. If it can't find the face, it'll default to the body. So I just leave that on. Here's where you go in and now you have choice of human, animal, bird. I have to admit I have not tested this out yet. I plan to test the bird. I've tested the animal in other Sony cameras and it really works. So I'm no doubt this bird is going to work, because I have seen some cool images of birds shot with this camera out on various social media platforms. You can change other things in here, left eye, right eye. Again, I'm a landscape person, so that doesn't really apply to me. Focus assist, oh my gosh, I hate this one. I wish Sony would put this off by default and not on. This is when you go to focus in manual focus, and it enlarges your screen 100% of the time, right to the middle. Well, that's great unless I'm down laying on a field of flowers and little flowers are in the bottom 1/3 of my frame. I don't want to be, suddenly in the middle of my frame and then have to recenter the focus button. So get around that. I just turn it off. I assign focus magnification to my custom button 2, and then I toggle around wherever I want it. Whoops. So I think that's it for that. Peaking display. This is really a kind of a cool thing that Sony introduced long ago, where it looks for edges, and especially where we shoot around dusk and dawn light. When especially dawn, when I find as I'm getting older and the light's getting low, it's hard to really see if you're in sharp focus. So this goes out and it looks for contrast. It looks for edges of contrast all throughout mid-range, highlights against darks, etc. And I always leave mine on, I'm trying to do this with the mouse, forgetting I have a camera in my hand, high. And you can set it, some people it bugs them, it's too much color on their screen, so you can control it there. Peaking color, I love red. It captures my attention, but you can get yellow, blue, white. It's all personal choice stuff. Okay, let's, in the playback area, there's nothing over here that really, that's all personal choice. You guys can set that up. This is all stuff, if you're trying to connect to a Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc., etc. People like to be out. I'm at Tunnel View in Yosemite. I snap a picture and now I want to put it up on Instagram. This is how you go back and do it. My thing is I never trust the camera to process an image for me. That's why I'm always in RAW. And that's why I don't mess with any of this. But it's cool. If I was shooting sports, and I know a lot of newspaper photographers have to do this, they have to transmit on a constant basis. And this is where it's all found. Now, if you can't find all the other stuff, where did they take away all these settings and hide them? They are all in here. And you can see I'm only on page, if you look up in the top right, 40 of page 52. So I got 12 pages in here to go through. Here's where all of your languages and area and date and time, once, fingers crossed, the world gets open for international travel, This is where I would go in and I would change my settings based on where I'm at. I live out in the Bay Area, so I'm set up San Francisco time. Nothing in here that I want to save or reload. If you're setting up custom memory recalls, this is where you would do it. This is one where I couldn't figure out where the custom key settings were for the longest time with this camera. And there they are. They're in operations. And here's where we're going to talk about back button focusing, which in landscape I think is a must, especially if you're doing astrophotography. You don't want that by default your camera's autofocus is tied to your shutter button, correct? Well, I don't want that. I want to set it up on the back, and you can see that Sony just gives a numerical value to each of these buttons. So what I have done on mine is, let's start with number 2. I'm only going to change 2 and 3. All of these other ones were just set up by default. I'll talk about 6 in a moment. Number 2 is the AEL button on the back right of your camera. I have changed that to autofocus, manual focus, selector, toggle. And what that means is if I push the button once, and let's say I'm in autofocus mode. If I push that button, now I'm in manual focus, complete manual focus. And if I push it again, I'm back in autofocus, okay? Because these lenses are, oh boy, I'm going to mess this up, but they're fly-by-wire, I believe they call them. And they're not like the old day lenses with the digital SLR, especially for those of you new to mirrorless. You just can't shoot autofocus and then grab the lens and turn it and think you're in manual focus. It doesn't work that way. So I wanted something where I never had to take my eye away from the viewfinder. And please, I know I can assign this to any button I want, including number 1, including a button out on the lens. If that works for you guys, great. Please don't send me emails about this. This is where it works for me, because my thumb is going to be on the autofocus on button, which is number 3. And I just want it where all I have to do is slide my thumb over to the right button, number 2. If well, let me walk you through my process. I'd come up to a scene, I'd be in autofocus, I'd find a nice composition with nice light. I'd set the tripod. Now I'm looking through the viewfinder, I'm refining, I'm zooming in, zooming out, and now I found it. Now I'm going to hit my number 3 button, which is autofocus on, to get an overall autofocus of the picture. However, because there's times I want to work with hyperfocal focusing to maximize my depth of field, I may not want to be autofocused on the very first element in my scene. I may want to focus deeper into my scene. So now I need to take over with manual focus to fine tune this. And I will do that now. I slide my thumb over to button 2 and I tap it once and I'm in full manual mode. And then I take a picture and I blow it up on my LCD and I toggle around looking. Basically, I don't look at the LCD. I will look at the electronic viewfinder and I see if it's razor sharp on what I want to do. If not, I will fine tune that focus a little bit more. I know there's hyperfocal apps. I have them on my phone. They're great, but they're not really practical in the field for what I'm doing with landscape. I would think they're more practical if you're a food photographer or you're in a studio and you need precise setup. Then you could certainly use them. I'm talking real world out, and hanging near the edge of a cliff in Yosemite, and the light's happening, and it's only going to last for a minute or two, and I need to work fast. So that's where I have the autofocus, manual focus toggle, and autofocus on, and I can just quickly, rapidly be back and forth. Simple, easy, and no muss, no fuss. And again, we already showed you where to turn that shutter off. I do not want that at all. And especially on astrophotography, you guys, you definitely want to be fine-tuning in manual mode. So there's my speech on custom settings. Here's where you can go in and set up your function settings. These are still not set up the way I want. I want to add, well, I do have ISO in there. I don't need flash. You can see some of them were just what came out of the box, but that's where you would go in and set those up. Excuse me, let me get back. Movie record with shutter, all that stuff. This isn't a video on movies. Dial customizations, I leave everything the way it comes out of the box. Touch operation, I don't. This is more important, I think, if you're doing video than if you are doing stills. Although I do see people in my workshop touching the back of their screens to do focus. They don't like putting their eye up to focus for whatever reason. That's fine. Finder monitor, a couple things in here. Well, without a lens on, I can't get into it. But this one right here, monitor brightness. Please, you guys, don't go in and mess with that. Leave it at default. I see people trying to brighten up their monitors in the field, especially, you know, when they're in kind of more bright light, and they think that's going to translate to their picture brightening up, and it doesn't. It just brightens the viewfinder up. That's all it's doing. It's not doing anything to your picture. That's why we really preach in my workshops that I teach about the histogram and using the histogram to tell you if your exposure is correct and not your monitor brightness. Let's see here, display option, auto review. I do come down and I set this for 5 seconds, and then I can just push my shutter button and it'll go off. If you don't like it, you can turn that off. Sometimes I do. Nothing in here. This is where you'd mess with your volume settings. You know, like I like that fake shutter sound that I talked about in electronic shutter operation, where I want to hear at least a fake sound of the shutter firing as opposed to not. But if I'm shooting golf, as I did the other day, I have the option of turning it off. Your USB connections, nothing in there that this is I set something in here with the HDMI just to record that screen. Over here, this is your infrared remote control, which I do own. I've got mixed feelings about using it. It's just one more tool that I lose out in the field. I'm the king of losing caps and back caps and camera caps and everything, so I just think this is one more thing I could use. And I do a lot of shooting my landscape just on 2-second timer or a remote timer. Here's where your anti-dust excuse me, is, and I have this as a function menu that we'll go over in a moment. And this is where you can clean your sensor. You would hit enter and the sensor opens up. I do have a sensor cleaning video that I recorded with Kurt Fargo, who's probably the premier sensor cleaner, expert on sensor cleaning, I think, in the world. And I actually linked to his site where you can buy his sensor cleaning equipment. I'll put the link in down below. And this one, shutter when power is off. Now this is new, and what this does, when you turn off your camera, the shutter will close. Now, be aware that that shutter is very, very close to the opening of your flange. So as you're taking that lens off, you're no longer having to worry about dust flying in on your sensor, so you don't have to rush, but be careful you don't accidentally stick a finger in and bend or break a shutter blade. It could happen very, very quickly. Auto pixel mapping. Honestly, I don't know what that is. I'll have to go research that. And version, here's where you find your version for any firmware updates. Now I want to come back up to my menu, which was actually page 1. And you can see to add an item, I simply click add an item, and then I go out and scroll through what it is I want to add. And then it's added into my menu. And let me get up and let me go over to my menu. I think you have 3 pages with 6 add-ons that you can put in per page, for lack of a better word. 6 functions you can put in. And these are just the ones I get to quickly. I want to be able to format my card. When do I format? Only and only, I say this over and over, after I have gotten back to my office, backed it up on 3 drives, and put it in the cloud. Then I feel comfortable enough that I can go and format my cards. You can see I've added in APS-C and standard full frame shooting. I know the old argument is, well, I can crop at the computer, but I like cropping in the viewfinder so I can see what's on my edges. Autofocus with shutter. I've just left that one there because there may be a time I do want to default back to turning my shutter on. Subject selection, that's your bird, human, animal settings. My anti-dust function, so when I do want to go in and clean my sensor, it's right there. And my focus area, which we talked about, is always on tracking. Okay, so that's about it. Those are my settings. I know, very minimalistic, but 52 pages. And this way, as I said in the beginning, I could be shooting a beautiful ocean scene at Big Sur, a flock of seagulls come by, and I could instantly be photographing them at 30 frames a second. This is really a do-it-all camera, and we haven't even touched on the video. You will have to go somewhere else to learn about that. It's an amazing camera. It's not cheap, as you know. If you own it, you paid your $6,500, and but you've got in my opinion, the current state-of-the-art camera on the market. There's nothing that can touch this thing. And the dynamic range, in my opinion, is every bit as good as the A7R IV. So we'll see what happens when the A7R5 comes out. But it's one heck of a camera, you guys. You made a good investment. Hope this helps you out. If you're interested in learning anything about my workshops, we're pretty full up, but we have a couple of openings coming up this summer in a workshop where I'm a hired instructor out in Madeline Island, Wisconsin. And you would link through my site to their site to get that set up. And then we do have some openings in October, assuming we can get into the Scottish Highlands. We have 6 openings. That's an amazing workshop. And everything we're hearing from the UK is they're supposed to be back business as usual between the US and the UK. This June 15th or June 21st is what we're hearing from my wife's relatives on the ground. She's a Brit. And now, if you're coming from another country, you would have to check. And then other than that, I can't, one in Patagonia, one left, and that's going to be in November. So just go to my website, www.donsmithphotography.com. All my links are conveniently set up on the left-hand side to workshops, to discounts, to my galleries, to everything else you can think of. Okay, so I hope, again, this helped you out. And until next time, you take care.